Oh, hello there. Yes, well, it's still got that nipple in the air, as we used to joke back in the 1980s when, well, it seemed quite funny, really. Now it's just cold. Anyway, it's going to be intriguing over the next few weeks to see exactly where the dust settles amongst our glorious, well, Grifterdom class. No doubt headed up by the zenith of the Reform Party and sort of falling out from there. Yes, because of course so many of these people have managed to put their eggs into a very Trumpian audience basket and well, it creates a problem in and around audience capture. We'll come back to that. But I mean, sensible voices. Yeah, I know I'm going to use that phrase and it's a well-worn one, but there are sections of the right-wing, media out there that are actually sort of like thinking about things. And I will point you to, yesterday's Times with Max Hastings, who is a highly respected author and a highly respected journalist. He was editor for a long period of time, for example, at the Daily Telegraph. So you can't really sort of accuse him of wokery at all. And yet he's completely sidelined whenever it comes to people inviting on historians. I mean, he has a vast amount of books that he's written about 20th century history, particularly the Second World War. And yet, no, we don't invite him because he has the wrong ideas, because he's not an ideologue. He comes from that old-fashioned Daily Telegraph editors lot who actually think about things. To a certain extent, Andrew Neil has that sort of quality. The sense that if he interviews someone like Ben Shapiro, he's likely to give him a good kicking simply because Ben Shapiro needs a good kicking. Anyway, stay firm in the face of Donald Trump's divide and rule. The president's treatment of Zelensky leaves the Western alliance in its gravest crisis since 1945, but we must pull through, yes, because we need to be thinking our way through sensibly where to go forwards. But of course, our commentators will just simply ignore those notions because having basically set themselves up to needing those clicks one way or another, be they on YouTube or increasingly on Twitter, which is designed to set up to monetize their particular nasty, and I would argue quite anti-patriotic and anti-British racism. They have nowhere to go. So increasingly the kind of, whatever moribund notions of intellectualism, cough, that they have just simply go out the window. And I will point you just a couple of examples yesterday. I mean, we had this from the Lotus Eaters, right? Okay. Britain's witchcraft epidemic. Yeah, where, basically an expose of British churches being involved in basically exercising demons. But the way that the Lotus Eaters has to portray it for their 14-year-old American Nazis sort of audience, of course, is very much along racial lines, because obviously they're not racist, but they do see everything through that prism. A bit strange. But that got me thinking back in the 90s when I went to a British Pentecostal church, because someone I was working with basically I had to go along with them on a Sunday morning, this particular person and their mum. Anyway, at this church, which was an all-white church, the nominal sort of vicary type, because they don't have vicars as such, they have leaders and things. It's all very iffy in a religious sort of way. But anyway, this bloke earnestly talked about a young member of the congregation who was in hospital who'd been put there by witchcraft by a particular individual who was a devil worshipper. They all knew who it was, and unfortunately the police weren't going to do anything about it. Yeah, because you're talking about bleeding witchcraft, aren't you? Now, there will always be people out there that will make money from the feeble-minded, and there were exposés like this 20, 25 years ago with evangelical churches in the UK. predominantly, with a West African diaspora, because they are the predominant people that have kept Christianity, the numbers going in Britain. I won't talk about that because that's racially problematic for the boys at the Lotus Eaters. I would imagine that newborn Christian Carl doesn't want to go there at all. So we just present this as a stupid bunch of people that believe stupid backward things. Yes, that's Christianity for you, isn't it? But of course, we have to not criticise Christianity in any shape or form unless it's mildly convenient at any one given time, like the Church of England suggesting that people aren't particularly racist, because that doesn't go down well. But that just leaves a bad taste in the mouth. If you're going to criticise people for believing nutty things, then for God's sake, criticise Christianity. Nah, I won't do that. It's not left-coded. It's right-coded to do that. Anyway, which brings us perhaps neatly on to my favourite grifter of the lot, which is James Esses, who, again, is just a fine example of audience capture. He has nowhere to go now that he's tied himself to Matt Walsh's mast. So we have to follow whatever particular pre-programmed routes there are, because otherwise my audience might get a bit cross. He does sometimes get in trouble with Kelly J. Keane, somebody who is so out there that she's allowed to make her own statements, but James can't, because James's crisis of masculinity is always up there for everybody to see. So let's have a look at this, shall we? Transphobia, Islamophobia. Yes, there you go. That's your audience, James, isn't it? Well, that's your audience and Matt's audience, yes. These terms are used to castigate and shame those who speak out against the mutilation of children or Islamist extremism. No, they're used against people like you and Matt for very good reason, James. Yes, phobias are only phobias if they're irrational, which got me thinking about the whole thing, about the notion of, James being a therapist. And I was thinking, well, all phobias are irrational because that's the nature of phobias, isn't it? But the reason why we call it homophobia is because it is an irrational fear of a group of people, because you will walk past people that are trans every week, shall we say, because there aren't a lot of them around, without knowing it, okay? It's not like it's not like being afraid of ghosts or warthogs, okay? It's a bit hard to miss a warthog, and presumably, even though they don't exist, it would be quite hard to miss a ghost, yeah? Those kind of things are quite tangible in their own respect. But of course, it is an irrational fear. Homophobia is a fear of gay people because they are dangerous, aren't they? Even though, obviously, when you're sat on the bus or on the train or in the pub, there will be gay people there. I've actually worked with young people that swear blind to me that they really can't stand gay people because they all look like they've got pink hair. And I will point out to them that when they're down at the gym, there's a really good chance that that bloke who's getting changed in a naked sort of sense next to them is gay. Because that's where gay people go. It's part of gay lifestyle to look your buff best. It's that masculinity thing. Yeah? I mean, if you want to see a real gay character, just look at the Tate brothers, for God's sake. That's homoeroticism on legs, isn't it? But James can't deal with that. So he therefore projects all of this stuff outwards, and it's everyone else's problem, yeah? Which is basically the bread and butter of what he does, of course, because then he goes into this whole thing, a bit like Mary Whitehouse, about swooning at anybody that basically displays their own sexuality, because he's terrified of his own one. Working definition of homophobia. Okay, yeah, here we get this. The queering of society. Yeah, Sheffield Student Union is hosting a fetish night for its students, but clarifies genitals must be covered. Kink, an exclusive sexy night celebrating freedom, fetish, and fearless self-expression. Yes, imagine that, right, okay? A bunch of people who are over the age of 18 expressing their sexuality. Isn't that awful? Isn't that awful? Yes, it's awful, James, isn't it? isn't it? Unless, of course, it's perfectly legal and none of your damn business. But of course, you can, of course, get the people frothing at the mouth, because it can't be that these people are expressing their own sexuality. They have to have been turned into it by the bad people. The witches, presumably. Yes, ooh, they're bad, aren't they? They're after our kids, even though the kids in this case presumably are 19, 20 plus. Odd. It's just very odd behaviour. And sometimes, when I meet extremely phobic young people, be they homo or trans or otherwise, I do have to point out to them that they really do protest way too much, which is James in itself. But, of course, it pays the bills, and it means that maybe he can save up and become a qualified therapist and learn about phobias and the way you deal with them. The way you deal with irrational fears isn't by insisting that they're true. Okay? Anyway, do have a lovely one. Do enjoy, if you can. Enjoy the sunshine. I mean, that was quite nice. It was actually warm-ish today when I was out on my little bike. It was nice. Yes. Yeah, we're getting there, aren't we? Yes. The bright sunlit uplands, as various American presidents used to speak of. Yes. We're getting there. Whereas these other people, just being left behind. Bless them.